2, 1. Dave Sims here, Announcers On. Glad you could join us for another edition, and we are delighted to be joined by Hall of Famer Jon Miller, a longtime voice of the San Francisco Giants. Jon, you look well. Good to see you. How are you dealing as the pandemic continues, the lockdown continues? How are things with you?
Well, I think I'm just like everybody else, especially people who have been around the game of baseball for a long time. It's baseball season. I'm ready to go. I'm looking forward to being at the ballpark and following the game and the progress of the pennant race and whatnot. But we get a lot of time off at the end of the season, and we relish it. We go through the holidays. We spend time with family and friends, and then usually come the day after New Year's, I'm ready to get back to work. I've had plenty of rest and plenty of off time, and that's what we were doing. We went to spring training, and then it got shut down. And this is just bizarre, but I think I just missed the game, and I think a lot of people miss the game.
Absolutely, the game, the rhythm, the preparation, and all of that, right?
Yeah, it's there every day, and so you look forward to it, and sometimes after a road trip, you'd like to maybe just take a day off, or maybe you'd like to not go to the ballpark that day, but then you go and because you have to, that's your job, and then you get there and your adrenaline starts to flow. You have to find out what's going on. How come this guy's not in the lineup? You got to talk to the manager. You got to talk to the players, and it's always fresh and it's always new, and you don't know what's going to happen. So once you're there, even though maybe you're a little weary of it on that particular day, once you're there, it's always captivating. So
as you know, as you get closer to post time, you can feel that surge and the excitement. 3, 2, 1, go Jon! Boom, there it is. You hear the theme music, et cetera, et cetera. It's a beautiful thing. Hey, you know what I wanted to ask you about, and we followed your career over the years. You've had the great run here with the Giants with the 3 championships. What was it, 5 years? But early Jon Miller, you grew up on a military base. When did that announcer bug hit you?
Yeah, well, and I was born on a military base, but I didn't really grow up on a military base. My dad died when I was a year and a half old. He was in the Korean War, so I never really knew him. And I guess we were on a military base most of the time until then. But my mom remarried, and I was raised by somebody else. But and he was a baseball fan.
There we go.
We moved to the Bay Area. He was a school teacher. He got a job out of college, and we moved down to the Bay Area. And so we had Major League Baseball. The Giants were in town, and he always had the game on the radio. In those days, in the Bay Area, baseball was a radio game. Almost no games were televised. We didn't get the game of the week within 75 miles of the ballpark. That was the nature of the national TV deal in that era. And the Giants only televised the games they played in LA. So,
wow. How about
and
that?
The Dodgers did the same thing. The Dodgers only televised the games from San Francisco. So
I remember when I was growing up in Philly, it was a big deal when we finally had transcontinental broadcast. I was like, oh, we're going to be in Candlestick Park.
Well, they had the national broadcast. They just weren't allowed to be shown in a big league city. So I think Salinas was the nearest city that would carry the NBC game of the week. And if I had some friends who lived up on the top of a hill who, on their antenna, they could actually get the station in Salinas. So sometimes I'd go over to their house on a Saturday so we could watch the game of the week, and it came in real poorly. But it was a radio game, and my dad always had the radio on with the Giants game, and so I became a fan of Giants baseball on the radio. So Russ Hodges and Lon Simmons, the great broadcasters, they taught me about the game. They taught me about the Giants. They described the exploits of Willie Mays, which were considerable. Juan Marichal and Willie McCovey and Orlando Cepeda, all Hall of Famers, Gaylord Perry. And you could hardly really help but be a fan. And I used to bug my dad, how about let's go to a game, Dad? What do you think about that? And when I was 10 years old, he and my godfather actually took me to my first Giants game, and they beat the Dodgers 19-8 in April of 1962. So that's my first game. It's like, man, these guys are so good.
And then they go on to win a pennant that year too. So you
They
think,
did.
magic year for you.
It was a classic Giants and Dodgers pennant race that ended in a playoff, a best of 3 playoff, just as it had in 51. And the Giants won it and went to the World Series. So that was the year I saw my first game, and really, and I just couldn't get enough of it. I bought a tabletop baseball game. Probably we all did.
Oh, goodness gracious, yes.
Dice and cards and charts. And I used to play those games, and I thought they were more entertaining if I broadcast them. So I would be Russ Hodges or Vince Scully or whoever, and I would roll the dice. And I was also the public address announcer. I was the crowd.
You must have loved that, being a PA announcer, right?
Yeah, it was a bizarre scene. The right fielder, number 9, Roger Maris. Number 9.
Was that? That's a great Bob Shepard. Yankee Stadium, football Giants, Yankees forever. One time I did a St. John's basketball game, and I heard that "Good afternoon, ladies," and it was Bob Shepard. But it's interesting the influence those guys have on you, not only broadcasters. Another guy when I was growing up, Matt Guokas Sr. and Matt Guokas Jr. Played in the league, and so did Matt Sr. way back. But Matt Guokas Sr. was the PA announcer, Franklin Field, for Eagles NFL games.
Wow.
I just remember hearing him say, "That old fullback, number 32 from Syracuse, Jim Brown." So it's amazing the influence those guys have on you.
Well, I remember the first time I ever even heard Bob Shepard, because I was visiting my grandmother in Eugene, Oregon, so far away from a major league team, and she got the game of the week in color on her color TV.
That's a big deal in the 60s.
I was all over that, and the game was from Yankee Stadium, and I think it was Dizzy Dean and Pee Wee Reese were the announcers. And they're playing the Red Sox, and Dizzy Dean is butchering, Carl Yastrzemski, the left fielder, and then Tony Conigliario, that, and however you say that name, that's a good one. And so then they said, "Well, come back with the first pitch right after this, Pee Wee." And before they go to the commercial, there's a few seconds before the station took the commercial, and in the background here, shortstop, number 10, Tony Kubek, number 10. And then I just remember thinking, wow, that was so cool, and that was the first time I ever heard Bob Shepard from Yankee Stadium. And I just thought, wow, I'd like to go to that ballpark. What a place that must be.
That was a thrill for me. Growing up in Philly, I get a job in New York Daily News, get to go to my first Yankee game, and I hear Bob Shepard along with John Condon, who was the voice at the Garden. And I got to work with Marty Glickman, who was one of the primo announcers back in the 50s and 60s. And I used to listen to Marty when we were Eagles season ticket holders, and I could get the Giant broadcast. And he had a very distinctive voice too, as you remember.
Well, I remember at Candlestick Park, the Giants had a public address announcer named Jeff Carter. And if you ever watch some of the old Clint Eastwood Dirty Harry movies, Jeff Carter was usually in those movies. He had some small role.
No kidding. Didn't know.
And he'd play a cop, and Dirty Harry would go to some kind of a club where they're dancing, and Jeff Carter would be dancing, and then he'd sit at the table with Dirty Harry. "Hey, Harry, how you doing?" I was like, "That's Jeff Carter? What?" And
that's really cool. I have to check him out on IMDb and look up a couple of clips. Really cool.
Check him out. There was one of his best role in the Dirty Harry movie, in my opinion, was one of the later movies where there was sort of a secret vigilante force of cops and
that sounds familiar.
Scenes and whatnot. So they have a scene where they're having this like competition in the police grounds, where they're in a mock-up of a neighborhood, and you have to shoot the bad guys but not shoot the woman and the child.
Yeah, right. I remember that.
And so Jeff Carter was the guy who was on the microphone. It says, "All right, Harry, you're up next." And so they had him doing sort of his same job that he did for the Giants. And he also did the hockey. We had in the Western Hockey League, and then later on the NHL came to Oakland. But we had the old San Francisco Seals of the Western League. And he did the piece, California goal scored by number 10, Charlie Burns. Time of the goal, 17:03. And he had a great voice. And he also, unlike most PA men, sang the national anthem. And now, ladies and gentlemen, will you please rise and join in singing our national anthem? Oh, say, can he sang it. So years later, I got a fill-in gig at the Oakland Coliseum for when they had the old Oakland Seals in the NHL expansion team. And Jeff Carter couldn't make it that night, so I got the gig. And they played the Montreal Canadiens, and I was very excited to do an NHL game. You sat right down by the ice between the two penalty boxes. And the people came over and gave you all the info that you needed. And there were fights, and the guys were in the penalty box on either side. They're screaming.
Major and minor penalties,
Montreal penalty, number 10, Guy Lafleur, 2 minutes for high sticking. And, but I got paid $40, and they said, "Now, can you sing the national anthem?" I said, why do you ask? And they're like, "Well, if you sing the anthem, it's $50." And and I thought, you mean Jeff Carter all those years was singing the anthem because he got paid extra if he sang. So it was $10 extra. So
that's a great story. Great story. Tell us how your first gig, major leagues. What's going through your mind at that time? When I got the gig, you went through the interview process, etc. So now you sit down, and now, hey kid, you got to call this game.
Well, I was 22 years old. And I got
like
hired.
I said, hey kid, yeah, right.
Yeah, I was totally a kid, and I was 22 years old. I'd never really been anywhere, and I go down to spring training. Monty Moore is the one who really hired me. Charlie Finley, after the '73 World Series, had a heart attack. And he spent much of that offseason recuperating at his home in Chicago from the heart attack. But before he had the heart attack, he fired Jim Woods, who was the broadcaster with Monty Moore. And he fired all the broadcasters. I think when he hired me, he owned the team for 14 years, and I was the 14th broadcaster. So if you worked for Charlie, you got fired. Monty Moore, though, was the voice of the A's, and he was there year after year. And Monty was really the only reason I got hired. He heard my tape, and he liked it. And he'd never heard of me. I was so silly. I was such a kid. Even though I had a press pass at Coliseum, I never went and introduced myself to him. I thought, well, what do I have? I mean, I'm only trying to meet him, see if he can help me or, whatever. And I thought that sounded phony or that was no. But then Monty says, how come I never met you? I thought I knew all the broadcasters in the Bay Area. I almost skipped over yours. I thought, well, this is phony. I never heard of this guy. And he says, well, listen, just for future reference, meet the other broadcasters. Make yourself known. So I went. And I almost never even sent a tape because I thought, well, Charlie Finley lives in Chicago. He hires guys from Chicago. He'd hired Red Rush and Bob Elson, who were White Sox announcers. He hired, the guys that he knew from and current big league announcers. And
sure.
But then, because I was sending tapes out to all the AAA teams and any major league team that was looking for somebody. And then I thought, well, there's no hope with Oakland. Why go to all the bother? And then I thought, well, surely there's no hope if I don't send a tape. And so why make a self-fulfilling prophecy? So I sent the tape. And then that's the job I got. So
wow, that's unbelievable. Man, man.
And the thing I was proud of was that Monty Moore heard the tape and he liked it. And he called some people that I listed as references to find out about me. And then he brought me into the Coliseum for an interview. And he said, do you have a tape of that full game? Because I said, maybe 10, 15 minutes of a game. And I said, yeah. So I had gone to the Candlestick Park to a Giants-Phillies game in 1973 and taped the whole game, hoping to get an audition. It was a really good game. So I brought the cassettes of that game. And after Monty, he interviewed me, 2.5 hours. He wanted to know all about me and everything that he could find out about. We went to lunch. And then he took the tape home and listened to the whole game that night, like a 3-hour game. And then he called me again the next morning and said, "Can you come in again today?" And I went in again, and they offered me the job. And so I was so excited. But he did say, says, I listened to that whole tape. Now, who does that? Nobody does that.
No way.
They hear your audition tape, hopefully, and that's it. And then they decide whether they're going for you or not. But he listened to the whole 3-hour game.
That's
said,
unreal. Did you have drop-ins and reads and all that kind of stuff? Did you throw that in too?
Well, I don't remember what I did, but it was a good game. I know that, and a lot of drama. But he said there were parts where the catchers had an equipment problem, and they had to fix his glove, and they had to fix his shin guards, a little strap, and so on and so forth. And he says, and you're by yourself, and you just kept it going and kept it interesting. I was very impressed by that. All these little things that people who do broadcasts would know to look for.
Yeah.
But people who run radio stations who make these hires, they don't. They hire disc jockeys and newscasters. They listen for a sound.
They're looking for sound, right?
Yeah. So I was always proud of the fact that that's how I got that job. That an actual play-by-play guy took the time to listen to the whole game and say, now this guy is good, and let's get this guy.
And that doesn't happen anymore, does it?
No.
Yeah.
It's the only time.
It's usually an executive who's, like we said, who's looking for sound.
Yeah. So I remember years later doing the Baltimore games, and we were looking for a guy. And Joe Angel, a longtime broadcaster,
sure,
had done the Twins, and then he was out of work. And he sent a tape, and I'm asking them about who they're looking at. And I mentioned Joe Angel could be good because I knew Joe. And they said, well, we heard his tape, but I'm just not impressed. And I said, well, could I hear what he sent? And he just sent air checks. Herb Carneal was his partner, and they're at Fenway Park, and Roger Clemens is pitching. He said, here's the third inning, and now Joe Angel. And it's just a straight air check. The first 3 Twins come up in Joe's inning, and there's a strikeout, a pop-up, and a ground out.
It's like when you have a guest. You have a paid guest coming in, and it's a 9-pitch inning. Yeah, right?
So nothing ever happened while Joe was on the air, and this is what the guy heard, And I said,
and he oh my goodness! And so he on that one alone, and that's all Joe said. That's amazing.
Well, I said, is that the only thing he sent? He said, well, no, he sent a few of them, but that's the one I heard. So I said, well, would you mind if I took all of the tapes and just went through them and see if I could find something that sounds like the guy that I know? He says, no, be my guest. It would be helpful to me. So then I found a game at the Metrodome, one of those innings the Twins used to have with Kirby Puckett and whatnot, where they'd hit little pop-ups and they'd hit the turf and bounce 40 feet in the air, and the guy turned it into a double, and broken bat blue. They were in 5 pitches, they get 4 hits and 3 runs, and the place is going nuts and whatnot. And so I played that for the guy at the WBAL in Baltimore. We're driving to the University of Maryland basketball game at the time, and so he's in his car listening to this, and he says, well, that's entirely different. He says, I think we found our guy. God, that's great. That's just what we're looking for. So, and I called Joe. I said, what are you doing? Don't you know how to send the tape?
That's a lesson for all young broadcasters out there. Don't send, an 8, 9, 10 pitch inning with nothing, where nothing happens. Your ability to describe, to capture the moment, the texture and everything, that's what it's all about.
Yeah. Well, Monty Moore, this is a good point, I think. Monty Moore had it was an ethic for him. If somebody went to the bother of sending a tape for a job, then he owed it to them to at least listen to what they sent. And he said he might only listen to it for 10, 20 seconds because he could make a determination immediately, say, well, this guy's it's horrible. I'm not listening to any more of that. Or it's like, well, this guy sounds good. I'm going to listen to more, But,
right.
And I think you've got to grab those people immediately. Don't build up to your best stuff. Put the best stuff in the very first thing that they hear when they turn it on.
I tell kids that all the time. Yeah, that is the goodness. Oh man, that is the best advice. And it's one of those things that needs to go viral. Let me jump ahead in our final minutes here. You win 3 championships with the Giants. Give me a couple of moments, some calls that you remember, or some moments that you remember that'll stay with you forever.
Well, 2010 was the first one. So many things that happened there sort of indelibly remain in your mind. But for me, if I'm to say what were the most memorable, and there's so many great things that happened in each one of those. But in 2012, the extraordinary thing was, and that was probably the best of those teams that they had. But they were down 2-0 to Cincinnati in the division series, and then had to play 3 straight games in Cincinnati. They hadn't won a game in Cincinnati in 3 or 4 years, much less to win 3 straight, elimination games. But they did it. And in game 3, the first of those games, they had 1 hit going into the 10th inning of the game. And I always kind of kid around and say, so they've lost the first 2 games, and now they're in an elimination game, and they have 1 hit through 9 innings. And I thought to myself, yes, they've got them right where they want them. This team's going to win it all. So, which is, of course, exactly opposite of what you're thinking at the time. But they win that game, and they win the next 2 games, and incredibly, they run the table in Cincinnati. Now they play the Cardinals, and they're down 3-1 with game 5 in St. Louis, and Barry Zito is the Giants pitcher. And, they're going to have to win 3 in a row again, and they do. Barry Zito pitches the greatest game of his life, and they win this game, and they come back to San Francisco, and they win the 2 games there, and win the pennant again. And now they're in the World Series. They're playing the Tigers. Nobody favors them against the Tigers. The Tigers have just beaten the Yankees, and the Tigers look pretty good. They got Miguel Cabrera is the best hitter in the game, and they got Prince Fielder. They got Justin Verlander. This team is loaded. Barry Zito's pitching game 1, and against Verlander, and probably that's a game that really stands out above the rest of them, because Pablo Sandoval hit 3 home runs in the game. And that might have been my line after the 3rd one. It was like, it's as if the Babe himself has come back to life. And Pablo Sandoval, but he hits his first at bat against Verlander, boom, home run over the center field wall. His second at bat, Verlander pitches in a different way. And Pablo, boom, home run over the left field wall. And Fox TV had a great shot of Verlander's reaction, which was like,
I remember that.
He just couldn't believe that Pablo hit an opposite field home run.
That's not supposed to happen, right?
That's not supposed to happen. And Zito shut down the Tigers. He shut them out. And, with some help from the bullpen and whatnot. So, and they swept that series after those 2 straight series where they had to win 6 consecutive elimination games. Nobody's ever done that.
Yeah.
Then they played this Tigers team against whom they're heavy underdog, and they sweep them. So, go figure.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a long time in coming, because you had some really good clubs there. I remember when Dusty was there, and you had the World Series in 2002, and man, you got close a bunch of times. And I've always enjoyed coming to do games at your place. You got a great atmosphere there. And I know it's very similar to Seattle. If you get there in April, May, or it's a little bit chilly, you got to bundle up. But it's a cool place, a great ballpark, and I tell you, it's I wish you guys luck. Real quick, if and when we do get going, what type of team do you think the Giants will be putting on the field here in 2020?
Well, I think the Giants are trying to build the foundation for consistent success in the future. That's what Farhan Zaidi's whole role has been about, what he's been trying to accomplish since he took over the baseball ops of the franchise. And so they took a step in that direction last year, and they have a lot of good young talent. And the best of that young talent probably still in the lower minors.
Gotcha.
This is kind of the tragedy of this whole season. No minor league season.
Right.
There are guys who need those reps, who need that experience.
500 ABs. Yeah.
Yeah, to progress and to learn and to get closer. The Giants have maybe their top prospect is named Joey Bart, the catcher, and maybe the successor to Buster Posey. And this was the year where, he was still going to start the year in the minors. And if he progressed as they anticipated, then he might be up in July or August. That track.
Well, that's unlikely to happen now, right?
Yeah. So the one thing that will be interesting will be if they play is that they're talking about a 30-man roster, so a bigger roster to begin with, and a 20-man taxi squad.
Taxi squad, correct.
And maybe a lot of teams are thinking this. I don't know, but I think there's a lot of sentiment with the Giants that taxi squad would have not just their top prospects from the upper minors, but all of their top prospects from all the
Why not? Yeah, why not?
And they'd be playing inter-squad games and with the big league coaches and being around the big leaguers all through the season.
Get the eyes on them, sure.
Yeah, and so I think that would be the how they would try to approach the learning curve with those.
I could see a lot more teams, in addition to the Giants, doing that very same thing. I mean, given the time constraints that we have. Wow. Hey, John, we got to run here, but I really appreciate you hanging in. Love the stories, a lot of good insight and good advice to kids in terms of sending out those tapes. And the other thing too, if we do play, we'll see you guys. So I look forward to that. With the new the new setup.
Thing, the three 10-team leagues, the Western League, the Central League, and the Eastern League. And the way I understand it, we would have our National League West and your American League West in the same league, but we'd play maybe 12 or 13 games each against our league, and maybe 6 games against your league. So we'd have a trip to Seattle, and you'd come down to our place for one. So I think the Mariners should be in our division anyway.
Every time I see you guys, you, Kruk, and Kipe, we love coming to Seattle. What the heck? We got to change this. We got to get San Francisco and Seattle in the same division.
Well, I do love Seattle, and I love Denver. I like going there, but the city and the area. But I think Colorado should be in the American League West with the 2 Texas teams. They're an hour closer. It's good for the broadcasting for all 3 of those organizations. Hitters Ballpark, like Arlington and Houston have been, and then Seattle should be in our league with the Dodgers and the Giants and
San Diego.
Yeah. So work on it.
Send that to Park Avenue here in New York.
Yeah. Get to Rob Manfred on this Zoom call, and we'll
absolutely. Hey, John, it's been a pleasure. Good to see you.
All right.
Thanks so much. Jon Miller, our guest here at AnnouncersON. I'm Dave Sims. We'll see you next time.